welcome everyone. I'm here with my fellow dear resident volunteer Willow. And Willow, do you want to say hi?
Hello, welcome everyone.
All right, so you probably have seen this song looks different here. And yes, it's special today. Well, my plan was to take you on a walk in our backyard forest. And today I woke up with the smoke and the sun, the red sun. Well, what's more striking is the ashes on the deck. Actually, a few days ago, we had a thunderstorm, and thanks to Charlie, who cleared up all the leaves on the deck, and now you see that the deck is all covered by ashes. And there's a heavy feeling in my heart with the fire, the forest, with all the wild animals. Yeah, and I guess we'll sit with that today. And I would still like you to take you on a walk into our forest. So let's start. So this redwood grove is probably a favorite spot for walking meditation for many of you. It's indeed very beautiful here. Yeah, I'd like to point out that this grove and this path is actually really pleasant to walk on bare feet. The redwood leaves are really soft. This part of IRC is kept in its natural beauty, and thanks to the vision of Richard, who kind of designed the landscape at IRC, and it's probably my favorite part. And I often have the desire to just wander into the woods, and I'm kind of glad that there's the fence that prevents me to do that, because it's probably not a good idea. All right. As you can see, our center is a little overgrown, during this time of sheltering in place. But it's as natural as we want it to be, so it's also nice. And we do thank our volunteers who came to help with us. And these staircases are actually newly installed after sheltering in place. This is a really nice spot for outdoor meditation if there's no smoke. And this bench is in loving memory of Victor Medina. I don't personally know Victor, but I appreciate him and the people who love him for this bench and IRC in our practice. All right, I'll show you another really nice spot for outdoor meditation that is a little hidden. So let's keep walking. This bench is in loving memory of Marty Martyr. Marty's practice inspired the founding of IRC. And there is another plaque at the entrance of IRC that's dedicated to Marty, and I'll just read it for you. Marty was a founding member of the Insight Meditation Center. He was known for his welcoming kindness and warmth. He created the center's Sangha Neighbors, a group supporting community members in times of need. Marty's deep practice inspired his wife, Barbara Ryan, to donate the funds that made the founding of this retreat center possible. Marty's goodness, generosity, and devotion to meditation practice lives on in the offering of the IRC. Thank you, Marty. All right, let's make our journey to our final destination. A hidden path.
Here's the little Buddha down here.
Thank you, Willow, for pointing. Yeah, this is probably my favorite spot. It's a little hidden. Really nice place to meditate outside. Again, if there's no smoke. Okay, why don't we sit down and enjoy the view for a second? Thank you for being with us today. Before I pass it on to Diana, I just want to remind you guys that there will be a community time at the end after the Q&A session. And the password is community. And enjoy your practice today. I'll pass it on to Diana.
Wow. Thank you, Yanli. That was quite something to be on a walk with you. Myself, having been to IRC so many times and having walked in those spaces, that was, I felt my heart kind of uplifted seeing all the grounds and the green, as well as being a little bit heavy with all the smoke. There's a lot of smoke up here. I'm in Redwood City. It's maybe an hour north of where Yanli is. And also I want to say, Yanli, thank you for pointing out that bench that's dedicated to Victor Medina. Victor was a dear friend of mine. He was a dear friend of so many people here in the Sangha. And he helped create the foundation for this whole, for audio Dharma, which helped create the foundation for now, for what we're doing now, to be able to be on Zoom or YouTube or have all these talks recorded and organized up on the website. He was one of the key people who helped make that happen. So he had a big role in IRC and IMC. And then maybe also thank you for pointing out the bench for Marty Martyr. How his practice inspired his wife to donate the money that was the seed money that allowed IRC to be created. And, it's a beautiful thing for me, and I'd offer for all of us to reflect on. I'm guessing that neither Victor nor Marty imagined that years later, some action that they did, it's such a big impact and affected so many people. And maybe I'll just tie in with that I'm here at IMC and I'm sitting in front of Mahapajapati, who's the first Buddhist nun. And maybe I'll just add, maybe she didn't realize either, thousands of years ago, that her ordaining would have such an impact on so many people all these years later. Just these simple activities that we do have unknown consequences, some of them quite beautiful and quite beneficial. So a warm welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as I said, my heart swells seeing IRC. That's, for me, IRC is a very special, beautiful place. So thank you for the welcome crew and all the people that are working behind the scenes. And at first, when I heard Willow's footsteps, I thought like, oh, that's somebody's typing. But then when I realized, no, this is a human being who's walking. I know that we're all just practicing together. So maybe I'll just say a few words before we go into a guided meditation. Recently, I watched a TED Talk with Jad Abumrad. He's a journalist and a podcast host. And he was talking about his search for his role as a journalist at a time when we find that there's so much division, separation, so much emphasis on differences and conflict and clashing of views, or clashing literally or figuratively. And he was asking himself, is there an alternative to simply highlighting the struggle that happens when different views, different perspectives, people from different walks of life, when they come together? Is there an alternative to highlighting this? And he used the word fetishize, kind of really want to point out the clashing, the difficulty. And his suggestion was that there can be a third. That is, if we have like one view is one, and then the second view is the other, and then they're kind of like in conflict. Can there be like a third that is something new that encompasses and respects and honors the other two? And he said that as a journalist, he was discovering that if we could hold these different views, hold these different ideas with respect, with patience, without any ideas of how they should be, that then this third way can be revealed. But it does take this kind of simply being with the differences, without this idea that we have to jump in and fix it or make it. To be sure, sometimes that's the right thing to do, but also, can there be room for the space to allow for a third option to become available, to be known to us, to be revealed, to be realized? And I'll say for me personally, this is what I'm doing right now in my role as a Dharma teacher right now. Also in seeing what's happening in the world, social injustice, all the different clashes that we see. I'm also holding these, seeing if there's a third way that respects and honors and holds both of these. And I have to say that I haven't quite yet found the exact answer what this third is, but I am confident that it's there. And one of the key things that helps support finding the third is to keep things simple. Keep things simple without making them too complicated. And so that's what I'd like to explore together today, keeping things simple. Okay, so with that as an introduction, let's just very simply connect to the felt experience of being here right now. That is, can we feel our feet touching to the ground, the zabuton, the cushion? Can we feel the connection between our feet and whatever they are touching? In a very simple, relaxed way, can we become aware of our upper legs? Maybe the pressure against the chair or the cushion or whatever posture you might be in. Maybe you're lying down. If you're standing, maybe you could stay with the sensation of the feet being connected to the ground. And in the same way, feel what the hands are touching, what they are connected to. Again, in a simple, relaxed way. Nothing in particular needs to be happening. We're just feeling what the hands are connected to. Might be something smooth, maybe a little bit rough, maybe warm or cool. And then, is there a way that we can simply connect with the sensations of breathing? Movement of the chest or the abdomen, or maybe the air going in and out of your nose. And then when we find ourselves lost in thought, no need to make a problem out of it. We just very simply begin again with the sensations of breathing. We're doing this very simple activity of noticing. We're not trying to do anything special or be anything special. We're just becoming aware of the sensations of breathing. If you find that there are complications in the form of lots of thinking or planning, fantasizing, worrying, whatever it might be. Can we let that be in the background? Just very simply be with the sensations of breathing in a relaxed, easy way, but also without being complacent. This is part of the art of meditation practice. It's how not to get tangled up in our experience and how not to just slip off our experience. And there's only one way to learn this, and that is to notice, oh, this is what being tangled up, tightly attached to, grasping, clinging feels like. And oh, this is what not really connecting feels like. What would it mean to keep the practice very simple? Or just noticing the sensations of breathing without expectations of how things should be. Without ideas how they used to be. But just being with this moment. So now we have some time for walking meditation. And I'll say just a few words. And I'll say that one part of practice is to be aware, simply aware, of our experience while we're moving. We do much more moving in our daily life probably than we do just being stationary in a meditation posture, for example. So to have some practice in which we can be aware of our experience while walking, whether it's meditative walking or just walking to go to the refrigerator, is a way in which we can incorporate our practice of some mindfulness in all aspects of our lives. So the more that we practice being mindful of movement, the more it'll become the default setting. So that when we are going to the refrigerator or going back to another part of the house, whatever it might be, taking the trash out, picking up the mail, if the mind is accustomed to just simply being aware of our movements, it's a way in which we can keep our life in a simple, little bit more manageable way, instead of always being lost in thoughts and with this kind of maybe compulsive, obsessive way in which we might get lost in thinking. So it can interrupt those. The body, of course, is always with us, and we move a lot in the course of a day, whether it's shifting our posture or bigger movements. So walking meditation, maybe in particular, and just being aware of the sensation of moving in general, can be a really powerful support for the meditation practice. So for walking meditation, can we walk in a simple way? There's a number of different practices for walking meditation. So for this one, just walk in a simple way, maybe noticing the pace in a kind of a global way. Is this fast? Is it slow? Is it bringing my energy up? Is it keeping the energy down? We, in a simple way, just notice the pressure of the ground against our feet. Without making it too complicated. There are meditation instructions to do it in a little bit more detailed manner, but for today, we have the emphasis on keeping it simple and yet not losing our awareness, and yet still being connected to our experience in a relaxed, easy way, with one step at a time. We're not saying that we're going to be aware, connected, mindful of every single step for the next 20 minutes or so. We're just saying we'll be connected to the next step. And then, of course, the one after that. And then the next step. So one step at a time. And just settle into the feeling of the body moving. I would have said to walk outside. Those of you here in the Bay Area, that might not be advisable because of all the smoke. It's heartbreaking from the fires. I find it very tender actually to think about that. Those of you not in the Bay Area or not in an area in which it's ill-advised to go outside, it can be a tremendous support to be outside with walking meditation. So if that's available for you and is appropriate, so if you can do that. So that bell will be rung at 10:47 by the RVs. And then I'll see you back here for another sitting meditation. Meanwhile, please enjoy in a relaxed, simple way, walking meditation. Thank you. as we come back into our seated posture, again connecting to our experience. What it's like to sit here now. And I'm reminded of something that Joseph Goldstein sometimes says. Those of you may know that Joseph is part of one of the major movements that brought this practice to the West. And he tells one of his teachings that he received, one of the first teachings that he received, and why he started to do this practice. And the teaching was, if you want to understand your experience, sit down and observe it. It's that simple. We don't have to subscribe to a belief system or a particular ideology. We don't have to wear particular clothes or make particular gestures. There are traditions who do this, and it's a beautiful expression of the practice. But right now, we're doing something a little bit different in the sense that we're emphasizing simplicity. We're just simply noticing the experiences. Whether it's with walking meditation or seated meditation. Just very simply becoming aware of the sensations of breathing. That might be some stretching or some tautness, or maybe the opposite of stretching, opposite of tautness, as our abdomen and chest move. being with our experience in a simple way. Make space, allows for the natural unfolding of whatever it is that's unfolding. Makes space and allows something new to arise, a new understanding, a new experience. There's a way in which when we get really tangled up with or lost in or busy with our experience, there's a way in which we perpetuate it. Our being really involved with it is a way in which it fuels it. So the invitation here is to, as best we can, just simply notice. I'm offering noticing the sensations of breathing. But if it's part of your practice, maybe that's more an open awareness, noticing whatever is arising. way to support keeping things simple and complicated is to notice what it feels like when it is complicated. That is, when there's a lot of thinking, planning, remembering, story making. When we wake up from that, at that moment, just to reflect how the experience is in the body. It's not uncommon for the center of gravity, so to speak, is up in the head somewhere, the control tower, where we might imagine is where we're going to solve whatever problem we're trying to solve. In contrast to when we are, not always, but often when we're just simply sitting and knowing that we're sitting. Awareness is more resting in the body, often in the torso. Or maybe there's feelings of connection with the feet or upper legs or the hands. So to support our simply being with our experience, it can be helpful to bring the awareness into the body. And notice, how does it feel when we are aware that we weren't simply being with the moment? How does that feel? in these last few minutes of the meditation. When you find yourself lost in thought, just begin again. No need to make any effort, or we don't try to pay attention to anything, and see what happens. Allowing awareness to arise. So, a warm welcome again for everyone. Maybe I'll move my microphone a little bit so it's hopefully a little bit more clear. So today we've been exploring this aspect of practice of simplicity. And to be sure, it's not the only way to practice. There's a myriad of ways. Sometimes it can be really supportive and helpful to take this way, to emphasize just the simple nature of becoming aware of whatever's arising, without, extra complications or things that elaborations. And to be sure that part of the Buddhist teachings is about simplicity. That is, that the Buddha, like many of you may know, right, there's the saying, it's attributed to him, said that he taught suffering and the end of suffering. He taught, we could translate this word suffering, we could understand it as stressful or dissatisfaction or uncomfortable or so many different ways. But to just simplify things as, okay, is this more uncomfortable? Or is it leading to something that's more uncomfortable? Or is this more comfortable and leading to more comfort? And to be sure, it's not about pleasure as much as it's about ease or freedom. So the Buddha is saying, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. In some ways, we could encompass all of the Buddhist teachings under this. And I know that sometimes in the academic circles, I've heard this, that there's two different approaches if you want to investigate, study a topic. And one is to do lumping, and the other is to do splitting. I kind of like this. Again, it's a very simple, maybe overly simple, but this idea of, okay, emphasizing how things are connected and similar and lumping them together, looking at big or overarching themes or some connecting attribute. Or are you splitting, like looking at getting down into the really detail and saying, yes, there's this, but this can get separated into 3 things, and then each of these 3 things can be separated into 4 things, and and on and on. And to be sure, there's value, there's tremendous value in both lumping and splitting. And part of Buddhist practice, a way in which we can find more and more freedom, is to have some familiarity and some facility with both of these ways, lumping and splitting. So today, I think using what I'm talking about, simplicity, we can say simplicity is kind of like a lumping in terms of just being with what is and holding it with care and with respect, and also maybe we might even say warm-heartedness, and to allow whatever is to be next to arise. I'm not saying this is the only way to practice, but it can be tremendously valuable to explore and have some facility practicing in this way. Of course, this idea that there's suffering and the end is suffering, another way that we could talk about that teaching is with the Buddhist teaching of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth being there is suffering. The second being there is the cause of suffering, or we could also say there is the arising of suffering. The third being there's the ending, cessation of suffering. And the fourth being there's a way leading to the end of suffering. And also, we might understand one of the key Buddhist practices is this emphasis on non-harming. This is another way in which we might understand there is suffering, and the end of suffering there's harming, and a way in which there's not harming. So simplicity is definitely a part of the Buddhist practice and a way to find greater and greater freedom. And we could also express this not in specific Buddhist terms, but just I think probably all of us have this experience of the sense of relief that arises when the big mess gets all cleaned up. I know for me, sometimes my desk gets a little bit messy with all kinds of things. And then when I finally take the time to organize and take care of what needs to be taken care of on the top of my desk and organize what still needs to be done, there's a sense of relief, there's a sense of well-being, there's a sense of, oh, okay, now it becomes a little bit more clear the way forward, what to do next and what the priorities are, instead of feeling a little bit overwhelmed. It's the exact same thing with our practice. But sometimes just helping keep things simple is a way to help prevent overwhelm or getting lost or not even starting because it feels too complicated or too difficult in some way. So simplicity supports a sense of well-being, and this sense of well-being can help support our practice. And I never saw it, but I heard about it, that there was a series, I guess maybe we would say like a television series that was on Netflix about cleaning up, the KonMari method, or I'm not sure what it was entitled, it might be that. So just this big recognition of the value and the uplift that arises when we simplify, when we declutter, so to speak, both our experience and our external surroundings. There's a number of ways why we might interpret that, and some is that there's this, when we simplify our experience, we're just being with what this is, and when we simplify our outer experience our environment, it allows our attention to stop being fragmented or pulled in so many different directions. It allows, in some way, our energy, like, oh, I should do this, wait, I should do that. Oh, okay, well, I'll try to remember this while I'm doing that, or, instead it kind of like encourages an integration and a wholeness. If we can just kind of keep things simple, then our attention isn't pulled in so many different ways. And also, one way to simplify is to remove those things that we don't need, that aren't supporting a sense of well-being, and then we can discover how little actually we need to have a sense of well-being, how little we need to be happy. We don't actually have to have this tremendous collection of objects or papers on the desk in order to be happy. And then, as I was saying, that simplicity allows something new to arise. It makes space. Or earlier, when I started this morning, I talked about this idea of a third. So we might have some conflict, some clashing between one idea, one thing, one experience, and a second one. But if we can very simply just hold these, then there can be a third that gets revealed, something new. But we need to make space, we need to allow for that third thing, whatever it might be, to show itself. So simplicity makes space for that. And there's so many ways in which we might interpret whatever this third might be into Dharma ways. One is, instead of the self and the other, subject and the object, there can be something new that arises. It's not either the self or the object, but in some kind of way, maybe it's neither and both at the same time. So pointing towards simplicity, to support this retreat practice is a tremendous support for keeping things simple. Specifically at IRC, we can talk about how if the aesthetics, the furniture, the things that are on the walls, just the visual experience when you're at IRC is very simple. It's not complicated, it's not loud, it's not over the top. Instead, it's to encourage, a little bit less visual stimulation, less entertainment, and more to kind of like help create the conditions in which it feels supportive for just simply being aware of our experience rather than it getting pulled out. In the same way, the schedule is very simple. Sit, walk, sit, walk, sit, walk. There's some meals in there. There are some, we all have, when we're on retreat, we contribute by doing what we call yogi jobs. But even these jobs are simple. Straight for each of us has like a very clearly, beautifully defined tasks to do. So this schedule that has this repetition, it's the same every day, except for the beginning and the ending days, is another way in which to really support a sense of simplicity, rather than our having to check the calendar, and see that schedule all the time, or something like this. We can just allow the rhythm of the days to unfold. Something else about retreat practice at IRC is the meals are not complicated. There isn't this huge, lavish spread with so many different things to choose from. I've been to buffets like that, and I felt kind of like overwhelmed. Like I don't know what to eat here. I only have room in my stomach for so much, and what should I do? I mean, I appreciate so much the food at IRC is simple in terms of there's not a tremendous, overwhelming amount of choices. It's not too complicated to assemble the meal. That's not like put this sauce on, roll this up here, then dip it into that, and then add this. And yet it's so supportive and delicious and feels nurturing, and I feel this tremendous amount of appreciation for whoever created the meals. And it's kind of this upwellingness of goodness with this the simpleness, the uncomplicatedness of the meals without making them bland or boring, or instead the richness, allowing the richness to be seen. Maybe even also at IRC for the walking practice, when we do walking practice outside, we just choose a path and we just very simply go back and forth. We're not going anywhere in particular. We're just going back and forth, allowing that part of the brain that has to navigate, to allow that to relax. Or we can do a little bit like Yuan Li did at the beginning of the practice today, is we can just have a certain route. There at IRC, I'm with my hands making this gesture going in a circle. This is something that I do. I just often am walking in the perimeter, knowing that eventually I'm going to get back to where I started. So there's so many ways in which we treat practice as a way to help encourage this keeping things simple without adding more and more complications, so that we can be with our experience, not be carried away and not be making things overly complicated. To be sure, this happens when we're on retreat, and certainly when we're not on retreat too, but there's a way in which we treat practice, just being away from all of our usual responsibilities and our usual reminders of all the things that we need to do. Allows us to keep it simple and to just be here for our experience and to notice, is it leading to greater freedom or lesser freedom? Is it towards suffering or towards the end of suffering? In just a really simple way. So now, I'd like to open it up for some questions. You can put questions in the chat box there in YouTube, and I'll do my best to address them. And I'm reminded of Victor Medina. Earlier, I mentioned him. He had a big role in really supporting IMC and IRC. And I remember he used to very often was the manager for the Intro to Meditation class that Gil would teach a few times a year. You know, like this 5-week course, or sometimes it's a 6-week course. And I remember one time asking him, like, what is this like that you just go and you hear the same topics over and over and over again? And he said, oh, it's fantastic. It's so supportive to hear the questions that people ask. He was talking about how, you know, every time for each intro class, that he learned so much from the questions that other people were saying. And I thought, oh, what an interesting idea. So I started to do the same, started to always go when Gil was teaching an intro class. And I have to say, it not only helped me to learn a lot, but it helped me to really have a sense of community when we're asking connection to make this connection to others, like recognizing, like, oh yeah, I had that question too. Like to feel like that I wasn't quite so alone with my interior experience when some people were verbalizing them. Or maybe even some people were asking questions that I didn't even know that I had. So in this way, asking questions is a way in which we can not only potentially get some answers, but help support a sense of community when we hear from others or we recognize that other people have questions. So, okay, so Lish at IRC is asking, can you say a little about sitting with feelings of anxiety? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lish, for this question. There's a number of different ways in which we can do this. Including to feel the anxiety in the felt experience in the body. That is do you know that you're anxious because your heart is beating a little bit faster, or maybe there's a feeling of restlessness, like you want to like jump up and bolt away from the cushion or whatever it is might be doing. So there's a few things. Sometimes it's helpful just to acknowledge this is anxiety. And somehow that can just allow our attention to settle and to say something about this is what it feels like to feel uncomfortable. And somehow there's a way in which we bring our attention to our experience instead of pretending it's otherwise or pretending that it's different. There can be a certain amount of relaxation that happens when we align with our actual experience. So in that way it can interrupt a little bit these feelings of anxiety when we actually say, okay, yes, this is what anxiety feels like. Then we no longer have this sense that we have to push it away or make it be otherwise. So that's one, is to feel it in the body. And two, to notice that when we feel it in the body, there can be just, even if it's just for a fleeting moment, a sense of, oh yeah, okay, this is what I really didn't want to be with, but it's actually happening. So maybe I'll be with this. Or that the sense of when we're just really mindful, there can be just a moment, a flicker of well-being. Of course, do we have a feeling of anxiety during these days? Is there a way in which we can say, of course I'm anxious. Right now we're in a pandemic. Right now today there's a lot of smoke from wildfires. There's economic uncertainty. There's social injustice. Of course I'm anxious. And can we, as best we can we just hold that experience? And recognize it's not easy, it's not comfortable, but in some simple way can we say, of course I feel this way, and to be with it. So these are some things that I offer. I'm sure there are some more, but maybe I'll stop with that question now. Suggestions, please, for remembering to keep things simple in the day-to-day tasks of a householder. Not get caught up in the to-do list and comparing self to others' accomplishments. Yeah, thank you. So I would say one way to do this with our day-to-day is to develop some familiarity, some facility of just mindfulness of the body, the felt experience of what it's like to be moving through space, to be touching objects, to be extending or flexing our limbs. And then that way kind of helps interrupt. If there can be some way in which we bring our attention to our experience, then it can interrupt what the mind is doing, because usually the complications are what is happening in the mind. It's this story making, it's this somehow a little bit detached from the reality of the moment. Instead, we're off planning or remembering or making some otherwise not being with our experience. So there's some things to do in day-to-day to kind of like help support this sense of mindfulness. One is to choose some activity that you do every day and to kind of like set the intention to be aware of this. I learned this from Andrea Fella, and myself I've learned this to be enormously helpful. For example, brushing one's teeth. Just say, okay, when I brush my teeth, I'm going to just be present for that. And then you might forget the first day, the second day, the third day. Oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to be mindful of brushing the teeth. So just to choose a task that you do every day and to intentionally bring mindfulness to that. And we just get used to bringing mindfulness to that one area of our life. Then in addition, to set the intention to be mindful of something that we do many times a day. For example, like walking through doorways, or sitting down, or I don't know, there might be some other things. When we pick up the phone to look at it, feel the weight of the phone in your hand. And something that we do multiple times a day, and just set the intention to be mindful of that. So between these two things, and one activity that takes a longer duration, and repeating this, maybe just with a really short duration, is a way in which we can help build up our mindfulness during the day and then interrupt some of the complications, the things that are not simplifying. It still means we have to-do lists, but they become less complicated. And it still means that we still might be comparing ourselves, but maybe the comparison doesn't last for quite as long. So this idea of, is lumping and splitting in service of examining the extent of suffering and or freedom? Is that a question from Heather? Thank you, Heather. Yeah, so this idea of lumping or splitting, I think that so ways that we can recognize that the Buddha had some of his teachings, this gross generalization, we could say he's talking about lumping, and sometimes he's talking about splitting. And part of our practice is to discover, is it towards more freedom to find, to do some lumping, that is to maybe just kind of kinesthetically, or maybe in our mind to feel like, oh, this is leading towards more freedom. This is not leading towards more freedom. And so that's maybe some lumping. Maybe we could just find our way with that. But with some splitting, if we find ourselves doing like, okay, I did this lumping and I'm noticing that this is not leading towards more freedom. And then maybe there's some splitting that we can do, like, okay, what's going on here? For example, earlier there was this idea of anxiety. Maybe we find that the anxiety is getting greater and greater, is really being fueled. Then maybe there's a time in which we can like tease apart some elements of it. Earlier I had suggested that, okay, can we feel how it feels in the body? But we can tease apart different other elements too. We can notice like anxiety often has like some really quick thoughts or some thinking with a certain amount of energy behind them. So I think, but this recognition that there's both ways of practice and that there's both teachings. And we might find that if we just lump them together, lump suffering, not suffering, is sufficient. And then when it's not sufficient, maybe we could do some splitting. But then maybe splitting, always like teasing things apart and then teasing this apart and then this apart and then this apart, we might find like, oh my goodness, that alone is leading towards suffering, all the splitting, so to speak. So then maybe we can zoom out and do some lumping. Suffering, not suffering. And just this recognition that there's room for both. And in my experience, there's people who have preferences for doing one or the other. And I think we can find the greatest freedom if we can use both ways of examining our experience, being with our experience, and to recognize that the Buddha taught both ways too, lumping and splitting. Okay. By freedom, do you mean less clinging or worrying? Yes, thank you. I use this word freedom in a kind of a generic, vague way. Yes, more ease, more happiness, less clinging, less suffering, less worrying, less anxiety. Maybe in some ways freedom is a sense of spaciousness or a sense of potential of things that might happen, as opposed to feeling trapped or stuck. And often when there's anxiety or worrying or clinging, there's a feeling of stuckness or stickiness at least, or something like this. Yes. As well as, I would say that, in this spiritual practice, also freedom can be talking about enlightenment or awakening also. So as both of these meanings, just the more everyday movement of less tightness, less stickiness, as well as awakening. They're both the same. The movement is the same direction. Okay, so now we're at the top of the hour. I want to say thank you. Thank you for your practice. Really deep bows. And I also want to say thank you to the RVs for hosting me and supporting me in doing this. And I know for me, it's quite meaningful to see the little videos of IRC. It's such a wonderful place and it's dear to my heart, and it's beautiful that you are sharing it with all of us in this way. So thank you. And now I'll hand it over to Heather, who will set us up so that there can be a community meeting on Zoom. But here on YouTube, I'm sending you a deep bows. Thank you.
Great. I just want to thank everyone for joining us for today's mini retreat at the Insight Retreat Center. My name's Heather, and I'm a resident volunteer here. And we're just really delighted to have had Diana Clark join us today, and of course to have all of you join us. And if you'd like, we will be offering a community time. You can check the comment chat function on YouTube for the Zoom link. And then the password is community. And it's just a time to connect for about 20 minutes and reflect on our practice. Thank you again for joining us. And this concludes the end of the YouTube portion of the mini retreat. Take care and have a good day, good evening, whichever time zone you're in. Thank you.